You think going silent is giving you the upper hand. You're waiting for her to chase, to wonder, to miss you. But here's the twist. A woman doesn't just sit around and wait. When you suddenly stop contacting her, something shifts in her mind. And what she does next, it might not be what you expect, but it will change everything. When you suddenly stop contacting a woman, whether it's intentional or not, her very first reaction is filtered through one key factor: how much she was emotionally invested in you. That single detail will influence everything that follows, from her thoughts to her actions to how she carries herself afterward. Because let's be real, if she wasn't all that into you, if the connection was light or casual, your silence might not even register as a loss. She might shrug it off, chalk it up to misaligned vibes, or simply move her attention elsewhere. There'll be no late-night spirals, no checking her phone, waiting for your name to pop up. It just ends, clean, no complications. But if she was drawn to you, if the emotional switches were starting to flip, the story's very different. And here's where things really begin to unfold. A woman who's emotionally invested doesn't just notice your absence, she feels it. She starts to wonder, did I say something wrong? Did something happen? Why did the energy suddenly shift? These questions become internal chatter that plays on repeat. And the more you've opened her up emotionally through quality conversations, shared vulnerability, consistency, the more confusing your silence becomes. Because for her, emotional investment isn't a game. Women don't usually invest emotionally by accident. When she starts to feel something real, it's often after mentally vetting the connection, testing your consistency, observing your words and actions. So when you disappear without reason, it creates an emotional disconnect she wasn't prepared for. And her natural reaction is not always anger, it's confusion. What you need to understand is that silence to a woman doesn't just speak, it echoes. And in that silence, she begins trying to fill in the blanks. If she was truly into you, she may start wondering what she did wrong, thinking back through every conversation, analyzing your last interaction for signs she missed. Not because she's needy, but because emotions, once involved, need explanations. This is the part where her reactions might catch you off guard. Some women become quiet, withdrawn, not because they don't care, but because they're processing. They're disappointed. In some cases, they won't even confront you about it. They'll just slowly shut down. That's not weakness, that's emotional self-protection. Others might reach out, not begging, but checking in. Hey, everything okay? Been a while, just wondering how you're doing? Those messages aren't just texts, they're emotional feelers. She's not looking for praise, she's looking for clarity, and the way you respond, or don't, will define how she views the version of you she once felt connected to. And here's where it gets deeper. Women don't just remember what a man said, they remember how he handled their hearts. So if your silence feels like a rejection, a mind game, or suddenly pulling away after building something that felt real, it plants a seed of doubt. Not just about you, but more painfully, about her judgment, about why she let herself care. Because when a woman opens up to someone, when she gets emotionally involved, she's not just choosing him. She's choosing vulnerability. That's why she doesn't give it to everyone, and when she does, it's with cautious optimism. So if a man vanishes without explanation, that silence screams betrayal, not of a relationship necessarily, but of trust in the process. Now, some women won't say a word. They'll let you disappear. But inside, they're grieving the version of you they started to believe in. They're building emotional armor. And that process, quiet as it may appear, can lead her to a place you might not be able to reach again. And yet, on the flip side, if she wasn't all that invested, if she felt your energy slipping long before the silence, your disappearance might only give her the green light to emotionally detach. She won't chase. She won't wonder. It may even feel to her like a confirmation that her intuition was right all along. And that closure, while quiet, is complete. So if you were hoping your silence would drive her to miss you, chase you, long for you, understand this: her response will never be about what you hoped to cause. It will be about how real the connection felt to her in the first place. Emotionally invested women respond deeply, but they also heal deeply. And when they do, the door may close harder than you expected. Because silence doesn't just create space, it creates decisions. And when a woman feels your absence more than she ever felt your presence, that's when she truly starts to let go. Once the silence has set in and the emotional confusion kicks in, something fascinating can start to happen. For many women, especially those with a bit more confidence or emotional intelligence, the next phase is what I like to call test mode. See, at some point, a woman stops simply reacting and instead begins to observe. Your silence becomes less about missing you and more about seeing what it truly means. And in this space, she doesn't just wait. She analyzes, she calculates, and in some cases, she mirrors. Here's the thing. When you've been consistent, communicative, maybe even vulnerable, and then suddenly go quiet without warning, it triggers a kind of mental shift. Now, she's trying to figure out whether this is a game, a misunderstanding, or a reveal of who you truly are. So rather than giving you that instant reaction or chasing you for answers, she might subtly flip the script. She'll pull back emotionally, not always to punish you, but to protect herself. And sometimes, yes, to test you. To see what happens if she stops trying too. One of the quickest things a woman will do when your behavior changes is to sharpen her eyes and soften her effort. She may stop initiating texts, stop checking in, and start matching your energy. A psychological mirror. This isn't anger, this is strategy. She wants to know, will he notice I pulled back? Will he care that I stopped? Will he even react the way I once did when he went silent on me? And here's what makes it even more layered. This test isn't always conscious. She's not sitting behind her phone plotting. Sometimes it's instinct. It's driven by pride, by uncertainty, or that natural human urge to maintain a sense of dignity when something starts to feel out of balance. She doesn't want to give you more effort than she's receiving. She doesn't want to feel like the only one fighting for clarity. So instead of doubling down with communication, she withdraws and just watches. Now here's where a man really needs to pay attention, because the moment she stops pushing for answers or reaching out, it might look like she's detached. But what she's really doing is collecting data. Every hour of your silence, every day that goes by without effort, is quietly confirming something for her. And in her mind, that little test she started, it starts to provide answers. And guess what? If your silence was meant to get a reaction out of her, to make her chase, to boost your ego, it might not work the way you hoped. Because if she realizes that your communication was always conditional, that your energy disappears without explanation, she might reach a very calm and confident conclusion. This man is not emotionally safe. That's why test mode isn't just some manipulative phase. It's her way of emotionally recalibrating. It's her deciding whether to lean back in or walk away without needing to make a scene about it. Because women who know their value aren't going to beg. They're going to watch your actions and adjust theirs accordingly. You're being observed. And not in a petty or angry way, but in a protective and decisive way. Now here's the scary part for some men. Many of them don't even realize that they're being tested until it's too late. They mistake her silence for disinterest, when in fact it's hyper-awareness. She's not saying much, not because she doesn't care, but because she's choosing what comes next based on your consistent patterns, not your excuses. She's putting the emotional weight down and seeing if you pick it up. The man who responds with integrity, with clarity, with communication, that's the man who passes this test. But the one who continues to stay silent, disappear, or come back only when it suits him, he ends up giving her the closure she didn't even have to ask for. Because in her silence, she's already letting go. Don't assume a woman isn't noticing just because she's not reacting outwardly. Women are much sharper than many think. Just because she's not texting you paragraphs doesn't mean her mind isn't actively processing. In fact, the quiet ones, they're the ones building conclusions in silence. And when they decide they're done, there's no big goodbye, there's no drama, just distance. It's easy to sit back thinking silence gives you power, that if she doesn't chase, she must not care, that pulling back makes you more desirable. But what many men forget is that powerful women don't play tug-of-war with their self-respect. If you let go of the rope first and walk away, she's not going to pull it tighter. She's going to set it down and walk in a new direction. And one day, when you decide to circle back, to reappear, to explain, it might be too late. Not because she hates you, not because she wants revenge, but because she got the answers she needed from your silence. Because when a woman senses you're watching her for a reaction, so good, shall give you nothing in everything all at once. After the silence has lingered long enough, after the confusion gives way to patterns she can't ignore, she inevitably reaches the part of the process where her thoughts take over. This is where the most important shift happens. She starts rewriting the narrative. And let me tell you, that shift is subtle at first, but it builds steadily. Because here's what you need to understand. When you suddenly stop contacting a woman, especially if things were going well, you leave behind a gap. A space filled with unanswered questions, and naturally she's going to try to fill that space with meaning. The human mind isn't built to leave blanks unfilled. So she begins to create her own version of the story, her own explanation for why you disappeared, why you changed, why everything felt like something until it didn't. In the beginning, her version of the story is almost always self-reflective. She questions herself before she questions you. Did I say too much? Was I moving too fast? Was I too emotional? Did I expect too much? Notice that her default response isn't to blame, but to search inward. That's not weakness. That's vulnerability in real time. It shows she actually cared. She's still giving you the benefit of the doubt, still trying to find a reasonable explanation that protects the good things she thought she saw in you. But that doesn't last forever. Eventually, after days or maybe even weeks of silence from your end, the self-reflection starts turning outward. The grace she once gave you starts to fade, and the narrative shifts from "what did I do wrong?" to "what did he just show me?" That's when the pivot happens. That's when she stops taking the blame on herself and starts seeing your silence as a statement, one that tells her more than you ever verbally did. It's during this inner rewriting that her perspective on you and on the entire connection starts to change. The things she used to admire, she starts reevaluating them. Were you really thoughtful or just good at saying the right things? Were you genuinely consistent or just chasing a moment? Suddenly, all the moments she used to replay with warmth are now being rewashed with a different lens. Not bitter, not angry, just clearer. And here's where it really sinks in. A woman who's hurt but healing becomes analytical. She starts gathering all the pieces, the initial excitement, the emotional openness she gave you, the way you made her feel, your sudden retreat, and she begins putting it all together into a picture that makes sense to her. And whatever picture she paints in that moment sticks. So if you went silent, without clarity, without closure, without care, don't be surprised if she decides to reinterpret the entire story. Even if you once made her feel special, desired, seen, those memories are now shadowed by the way it ended, or more specifically, the way you ended it by doing nothing. And guess what? This rewriting isn't dramatic. It's not theatrical. She's not venting to 10 people or crafting long posts about you. No, it's internal, quiet, but incredibly defining. Often it's during this phase that she emotionally detaches. And once she rewrites the narrative enough times, she stops missing you. Not because the connection didn't mean anything, but because she's reassigned meaning to it. It's no longer the one that could have been. It becomes the guy who never meant what he said. Or worse, the one who pretended to care. Once she reaches that conclusion, that story becomes her truth. And when a woman changes the story she tells herself about you, your return, if it ever comes, will land on hardened ground. Because here's the danger most men don't see when they go silent. While you may think it's no big deal, that maybe you'll reach out eventually and explain, you've already handed her the paintbrush. You gave her silence, and now she's filling in the blanks with something that allows her to move on. And you don't get to control that version. You don't get to dip back in later and say, that's not what I meant, because your absence forced her to create meaning in a vacuum. And that's the kind of meaning that sticks. This is why communication matters more than just being in touch. It's about emotional clarity. If you disappear and she never hears from you again, her mind doesn't stay in limbo. It finds a way to close the story, because it has to. Letting it linger would be emotional chaos. And women who value their peace, who are growing, who have matured, they refuse to stay in chaos for too long. Eventually, she comes to peace with her version of what happened, and by that point, it doesn't matter if it's the full truth, it's her truth now. That's how she protects herself from repeating the same mistake. That's how she promises herself she won't invest that deeply again unless the man on the other side proves he's worth her trust. So when you fall silent, without warning, without cause, without closure, You don't just disappear from her life. You disappear from her story.